So who actually had the most training out of the leader of the original trilogy, or the main character of the original trilogy, and the main character of the sequel trilogy? Those two people being obviously Luke and Rey, and it's something that's debated very often in the fandom, as people call Rey so overpowered, she didn't have much training for all that she accomplished, and the same is actually said to Luke very often, as think Luke was just this random farm boy at like 19 years old. A couple years later he defeats Darth Vader. So we're going to find out of the two of them who had the most training, or moments to give context to their growth of power. Training is just a simpler term for it, but there is many times where it's not necessarily getting a lesson or doing a training session where these characters actually develop their powers and skills. So we're going to jump straight into it. But just before we do,
I lied.
I want to clarify that some of my numbers may be slightly off, or I may have missed a few things, but I have fact checked most of what I said in this video, or most of what I'm going to say, and I'm not the most knowledgeable person in the Star Wars community, so I may get a few things wrong, but bear with me. The original Star Wars trilogy starring Luke Skywalker takes place over 4 years, whereas the sequel trilogy takes place over just 1. So immediately you would think that Luke would get more training in this time than Rey would. Well, he definitely has more experience in this time, but it's how that experience happens, because the biggest time jump in the original trilogy is between episode 4 and episode 5, where it is a 3-year jump, with A New Hope being 0 BY, as BY means Battle of Yavin, Empire being 3 ABY after Battle of Yavin, and Return of the Jedi being 4 ABY. So Luke's biggest time jump in the original trilogy is 3 years between episode 4 and 5, which obviously in episode 4, his only bit of training was a little bit from Obi-Wan. So yes, Luke has more experience in his trilogy, but what's interesting and what plays a big factor in this video is how their experiences go. Now, just so you know, those stats were from StarWarsFandom.com, a very trusted website. Now, like I said, the sequels is only 1 year, and that is 34 ABY being The Force Awakens, and 35 ABY being The Rise of Skywalker, and the time jump is between episode 8 and episode 9, where Rey has already trained with Luke, and is currently training with Leia in that time. That's why it's interesting. So let's get started. Luke's first piece of proper training is from Old Ben on the Millennium Falcon on the way to Alderaan, and this was just some small words from Old Ben, which is very comparable to Han saying to Rey that all the rumors about the Force that she has heard are true. Obviously, it depends on how long Obi-Wan was talking to Luke and training him on their trip to the Millennium Falcon, but what we saw in A New Hope was very limited, and it also depends on how many rumors Rey saw, but you can imagine it's at least relatively similar. Now, Luke doesn't have another moment like this until the trench run, where Old Ben's voice reaches out to him, telling him to use his feelings and not use the targeting computer to blow up the Death Star. Now, obviously this isn't training, but this is getting Luke to strengthen his connection to the Force and teaching him how to connect to the Force to help him do certain things. Now, blowing up the Death Star is obviously a very impressive feat, but how impressive actually is it when you break it down? Well, Luke already had incredible piloting skills, so obviously blowing up the Death Star wasn't purely just his Force connection carrying him. He was already a really good pilot, so it doesn't seem too overpowered for just having one small lesson and an old man contacting you through the Force, especially when you consider what Anakin Skywalker did at 9 years old in The Phantom Menace. Rey, however, has another moment of development before her big feat in her first movie, and that is when Kylo reaches into her mind. As in The Last Jedi, it is confirmed that Rey and Kylo have a dyad, and what we know from this now is that when Ben was looking into Rey's mind, Rey was also looking into Ben's, as their minds were linked, so she got a lot of information from his head when he was trying to get information from hers. This is what allowed her to do her mind trick, etc, etc. So a prime example of a moment that isn't training, but gives context to her like power growth or skill development in her movie. Now let's get on to her feat being the Kylo Ren fight. How impressive actually was it? Well, it's very similar to the Death Star with Luke, because it's not as impressive when you break it down. Kylo had just killed Han Solo, his dad, so he was very conflicted in this moment, worsening his ability to fight. He had also just been shot by Chewbacca's Wookiee bowcaster, which we'd seen earlier in the movie send stormtroopers flying through the air, so he's incredibly injured at this point. And Rey had also been using a melee weapon for years on Jakku, which is similar to Luke's piloting ability help him blow up the Death Star. Rey's experience with melee combat helps her fight Kylo Ren. Now, admittedly, it's not the same as a lightsaber, but knows what Luke did to piloting an X-Wing. It's similar, but not the same. So now that The Force Awakens and A New Hope is out the way, let's move on to The Empire Strikes Back and The Last Jedi. But wait, like I pointed out at the start, there is 3 years between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, so we can't skip that out for Luke. So let's go over what happened in that time. Between The New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, Luke was fighting for the rebellion, and yes, admittedly he wasn't out dueling Force users for that whole time. He was doing some piloting, therefore potentially improving his connection to the Force. Now notice how I say potentially, because if he was piloting like he was, say, before old Ben reached out to him in the trench run, he would not improve his connection to the Force all too well, because he wouldn't actually be using his feelings to help him pilot, so it would improve it very minimally. But if every time he went out piloting he was using the Force and using his feelings and connecting to it to help him pilot, he would improve quite a lot. So it's hard to tell how many times he would have been able to do this or would have done this, so we simply have to guess or assume that it wouldn't have been every time, but definitely sometimes. So given that between episode 4 and 5 it is 3 years, and if every couple of days he went out piloting and every couple of times he used the Force to help him fly, that is a very decent amount of progression in his Force connection. So I'd say after The Force Awakens and A New Hope, Rey was probably in the lead of like moments to justify her power developing, but now between episode 4 and 5 Luke is in the lead, but not by as much as you would think from 3 years, because it's not exactly like Return of the Jedi Luke to Mando Luke where he's going to improve every single day because he actually knows a lot about the Force already. He doesn't know much at this point, so his improvements are going to be minimal, but still enough over 3 years to put him above a Rey in terms of moments where his power would be developed or his skill or whatever. Now like I said, how much he is ahead of her depends very much on multiple things, including stuff from The Force Awakens and A New Hope, like how many rumours Rey heard that got confirmed, what she actually took from Kylo's head, etc, etc. But I think on the base of it, it would appear that Luke is in the lead at the moment. Now for real, onto The Last Jedi and The Empire Strikes Back. In The Last Jedi, or technically in The Force Awakens, Rey travels to Ahch-To, where she's there for about, in real time, a day, because we know the Resistance don't really achieve much while she is gone, as she leaves before they are on the run from the First Order, but they are on the run from the First Order for only a few hours, then they get to Crate, etc, etc. So in real time it's about a day, but we know on Ahch-To time, she's there for longer than a day, as we see literally nights go by. So Ahch-To is actually said to be aversions in time, just like Dagobah, which is where Luke goes in his second movie. So it's actually said that Luke was on Dagobah for about 3 weeks, and given the fact that Han, Leia, Chewie, etc. accomplished much more than the Resistance do in the time that Luke and Rey were away, I think it's fair to say that Rey was on Ahch-To for a week's worth of Ahch-To time, 3 times less than Luke was on Dagobah. Now this means that Luke actually gets a 2-week advantage on Rey's training in this movie, but let's have a look at what the training actually was. It appears on face value that a lot of Luke's training was physical stuff, a couple wise words from Yoda, and then some Force stuff, as obviously he was trying to lift the X-Wing, etc, etc. And then for Rey's, it was mostly words from Luke, some Force stuff, and very minimal actual physical stuff. She was training with her saber and her staff by the rock, but that was by herself. Now Rey doesn't really have a feat in The Last Jedi, as she does struggle versus those guards, and nor does Luke, to be honest, but he does have a big fight scene against Vader. But again, that's not really going to go down as too much of a feat, just like Rey's, because they aren't getting too much better from this. I mean, yes, it's dueling experience, and that's about it. I mean, I guess for Rey, there's more interactions with her dyad with Kylo, so maybe she got some more information from him. But yeah, not really too much in The Last Jedi and Empire Strikes Back for them, other than Ahch-To and Dagobah. And now it's time to move on to the year gap that both Luke and Rey have between their second and third movie of their trilogy. Now, from what we know, Rey was getting consistent training from Leia for this whole year, as Poe Dameron was moaning that she was never out in battles where she was needed, as obviously she is a good pilot. So from this we can assume she was basically training for most of that year. And if we do the same as what we did for Ahch-To and Dagobah, we'll actually give her this whole year added onto her training. Now this training is obviously some spoken words from Leia, some physical stuff and saber training like we saw from that training course, and she obviously would have learned a bunch of Force abilities too, as we see that she has some new ones in The Rise of Skywalker, such as Force Heal. Now these would have been learnt from the books that she took from Ahch-To that Luke had in his possession. Now again, Luke went on many missions for himself and for the Rebellion between episode 5 and 6, and he would have learnt a lot about the Jedi and the Force and stuff like that, and he actually had a duel with like the spirit of the Grand Inquisitor or something like that. Again, it's an interesting story, and I forgot to mention he actually had like some dueling lessons off like a stormtrooper between episode 4 and 5. It's an interesting story as well, but yeah, just to give context to that. He also acquired a new yellow lightsaber between episode 5 and 6, and obviously the one that he ended up using in episode 6, so he would have ended up learning a bunch about the Force in this time, but it really can't compare to a full year of consistent training from Leia. Leia. Yes, Leia wasn't a fully trained Jedi, but Rey had the books from Luke, the words from Luke that she got in the last movie, and Leia had been trained to near enough a full Jedi by Luke. She just didn't want to become a full Jedi. So I definitely think that Rey's training here is much more beneficial than Luke's year of going out and finding some random Jedi artifacts whilst also fighting for the rebellion. So if we do the maths right about now, Rey has 373-ish days of training, plus days where she got like those moments of context to her power growing. And for Luke, if we give him a generous 1/3 of his time between episode 5 and 6, which is very generous considering how much of the day you're actually awake, and we'll give 1/5 of his time between episode 4 and 5, which is still pretty generous for all the reasons that I pointed out back then, because he's not going to be progressing as much as what he would be between episode 5 and 6 in the same amount of time anyway. Obviously we're adding in his Dagobah weeks as well. This gives Luke 370 days, so it's very, very close at this point. And this actually means that in conclusion, Rey had more training than Luke, so that answers the main question of this video, but I have more to say. And I'm going to say this for the millionth time, it's not just training, it's moments to give context to their progression in power and skill. If we want to go into their last movies, there's not much that happens in Return of the Jedi before Luke's fight with Vader and Palpatine to give any reason to assume that he grew in power within this movie. Obviously he had like a little fight scene on Tatooine at the start, like Jabba's palace, and when he was going to get sent into the Sarlacc pit, but that wouldn't have improved him all too much. And Rey has a couple duels in The Rise of Skywalker and fights Palpatine's guards at the end, and what you want to count I guess depends on what you want to class as her main feat. You can count defeating Palpatine if you want, but she was extremely amped by all the Jedi, as she says. So I think really the one that was her, and only her, was her last fight with Kylo, which she was going to lose before Leia stepped in. But either way, within The Rise of Skywalker, she wouldn't have improved that much. But I'd argue that she would have improved within The Rise of Skywalker more than Luke would have improved within Return of the Jedi, because I think Luke was already better, so Rey had more room to improve, and she also did more things that could allow her to improve. Like I said, she had multiple duels, and obviously her dyad, etc, etc. So in this video, maybe the days are off a little bit, but I don't think it's all too much off. But if any of you are annoyed that I've shown that Rey has more training than Luke, again, not necessarily true because we don't know the full details, then if I'm being honest, I think I've been generous to Luke. Because other than his time on Dagobah, we don't have a period of time where he's been training consistently and I can just give him the whole amount of time. Like, the majority of Rey's time in this has been training, and the majority of Luke's time in this has just been when he's out by himself, and I'm assuming that he's going to be improving and doing stuff to improve in this time. So I think I've been generous to Luke in this video. So with all of this, what could the two of them achieve? I've spoken about Rey. You can either count her defeating Palpatine, where she literally just blocked and deflected his lightning and was amped by all of the Jedi, or you could count her duel with Kylo, where she was going to lose and then Leia stepped in. And for Luke, it's beating a conflicted and out of prime Darth Vader, but it's still a version of Darth Vader, so very, very impressive. And I would argue a more impressive feat than Rey's duel with Kylo. But does that mean that Luke is OP because he did something better than Rey despite less training? No, not at all, because it's highly likely that his midichlorian count on raw power is far superior to Rey's, therefore is already stronger when he started off. And also I think it's pretty clear that he's a really quick learner, so his time in training, he potentially learned more than Rey's time in training, so I don't think it's too outrageous. And like I said, it's a conflicted Vader because Luke is his son and he's out of prime because he's getting a bit old. But what this does mean is that Rey is not Mary Sue, because with more training than Luke, her feat was much less impressive. And it's not like her raw power and midichlorian count is likely to be extremely low, like she has got the blood of Palpatine still. But yeah, that is going to be all for this video. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please be like respectful and everything. I know I'm talking about the sequels and Rey, and that's a touchy subject for a lot of people, but most of what I've said is factual, and it's not like I've accused Luke of being extremely overpowered. I've just said I'm absolutely fine with him beating Vader. I think it's justified because of all the reasons that I just mentioned. So with that being said, thank you for watching. Please do leave a like if you did enjoy. Subscribe for more Star Wars content. 10K special coming very, very soon. And yeah, goodbye.